Layering for the cold, especially when you're on the move, can be a bulky, annoying, and frustrating experience. And if you don't do it right, dangerous. Today, we're going to take a look at how to layer for while on the move with USGI Layers. Hey guys, Lucas here from Venture Surplus, and today we're going to take a look at how to layer for while you're moving around in a cold weather environment. So that big part is movement. So we're moving around, and we're going to go into a little more depth about what all that means and how that applies to all this. So we're going to take a look at how I like to layer up from the cold weather and wearing kit, and I'm moving around a lot and sitting still just a little bit. So let's get into what movement means and how it's going to apply to the rest of what we're going to talk about. So what does movement mean? In this aspect, we're talking about is moving around tactically with kit on, with the ruck on, with the chest rig on, all those at once, maybe something like that. So you're moving around a lot of weight on you and you're adding some serious bulk to the layers you're already wearing. So that's the movement aspect. You're moving long distances, maybe it's only a K or two, maybe it's 10K, maybe it's on flat terrain, upside of a mountain, maybe it's a mixture of forest and lakes and stream crossings, whatever it may be. But we're on the move and we're moving around. That's going to play a big part in how we're layering. In our still moments, when we're sitting still, are going to last maybe 10, 20 minutes. And then by the time we hit those kind of times, we're going to stay still for a lot longer. We're either in a structure or we're in a dedicated spot where we can kind of layer up a little more. So these layers aren't going to affect, really cold environments. So that's what I mean by movement. So what are we trying to avoid with these layers? We're trying to avoid sweating. That's the biggest thing. We do not want to sweat while we're in a cold weather environment. So once it hits those 50s and gets below there, sweating equals bad, especially once you sit still. So while you're on the move, you may not feel it too bad. Your body is just going to naturally sweat. And a lot of these layers help prevent that. And that's something about these layers that's pretty cool, is they help maybe not prevent you sweating, but they're going to help get that sweat off of you. So that's what we're really trying to prevent, though, is sweating. Now, if you're moving around in layers and you start to feel yourself get really warm and cozy and then get a little hot, it's already almost too late. Now you have to downgrade pretty quickly, and you can risk getting a freeze, getting a chill, and just getting cold in general because you sweat, and now you're downgrading layers. So a lot of these layers, they're not going to keep you nice and cozy, warm, toasty. You're not going to sit down and be like, oh, cool, it's time for a cup of coffee. I'm, nice and warm. They're keeping you comfortable and maybe even a little bit on the cold side, because that's going to keep you from sweating and keep you from, hitting a bad spot. Because once you start to sweat and you sit still, especially for a long halt, hit that patrol base, hit the ORP and you're sitting there for a minute, hit the OP, you're sitting there for a minute, or days, you don't have time to change necessarily right away. That's what's going to hit you, and that's going to cause hypothermia, which we do not want that, because once you hit that stage, it's really too late to help prevent anything like that. And now you're just, essentially you're just a casualty. So we're trying to prevent sweating at all costs. And again, if you feel yourself getting too warm, it's probably already too late. You really need to pay attention to how these layers are hitting you, how you're feeling as you're moving around, and downgrade and upgrade, depending on what the weather is. There's some good ways to dump heat, and there's some good ways to pack on the heat really quick. And we'll get into those as we get in these layers. But at the end of the day, sweating is bad. So the temperature we're talking about for this one it's kind of broad, and that's just because the U.S. has a lot of different temperatures during the winter, during the fall, winter, early spring, everything in between. The temperatures do vary quite a bit, and the weather changes quite a bit. So for the most part, the layers we're going to talk about, how to wear them, is stuff I've worn from the 20s all the way into the 50s. So we're going to see a good mix of your kind of regular temperature ranges that a lot of you are going to experience this winter and fall and even into the spring, and it's going to really kind of play the part into there. So we're not talking about extreme cold weather. We're not talking about zeros, teens, single digits, extended time out, and those frigid temperatures. We're not quite getting there. This is more cold weather, and when you get into those frigid temperatures, a lot of things change as far as how you're going to layer and what you're doing in the first place. And while you can wear some of this in those temperature ranges, it's not quite for that cold of weather. So that's the temperature range we're talking about, and predominantly in a dry environment, because that's just the best environment you're going to be in and want to be in when you're in this kind of cold weather. Now, snow, there's the wet snow and there's the dry snow. So your wet snow is it's a little melted, it's a little too warm for it to freeze or be frozen immediately upon hitting the ground, or it snowed the day before, warmed up a little bit, but then it refroze overnight. So that's kind of your wet snow. It's not the greatest to be in. It's almost like just a really cold rain. Now your dry snow, it is super cold, not super cold necessarily, but cold enough that it's not going to melt on contact with the ground. It's not going to melt immediately upon touching you. If it hits you, it might just be able to be brushed off. That's kind of your dry snow. So If we're not, completely dry, dry snow's a little better because it's just a little easier to get off you, a little easier to deal with. Rain, some of these layers deal with rain and snow, obviously, and that just adds another kind of complexity to your layers, but there's dedicated layers just for that. And then wind, and then your more extreme snowstorms, rainstorms. Because depending on where you're in the U.S., your wintertime conditions can change quite dramatically. In the southeast, you're going to be more exposed to rainy, wet winters. Out here in Colorado, it's more of a windy, snowy winter where you might not get snow all the time, but it's definitely going to be windy, and it's definitely going to push those temperatures down even lower because of just, wind chill and everything like that. So temperatures do play a big part. And then coming with temperatures is your humidity. And humidity, just like cold, is subjective upon the person. So if you've ever been in the southeast or humid state in general, not all the humid states are limited to the southeast, and then gone from there to a dry state or a dry state to a humid state, you notice a lot of things changes the way you feel, you breathe, you sit, everything like that. Growing up in Georgia, you take a shower, you get out, you're still wet, you don't dry off forever. Here in Colorado, you take a shower, you're dry as you walk out of the shower. Humidity plays a big difference on how the moisture is going to wick off your body, which is a really big thing because we do not want to sweat while we're in these cold weather environments. So it's going to be a whole other thing we're going to talk about is why sweating is bad and what these layers do to help prevent that. So that's your temperature kind of in a nutshell. Obviously, you're going to see more extremes in other places. If you're in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains in general, during the wintertime, the fall, spring, even just the summer, you're going to see where temperatures just can wildly fluctuate. You can hit those 30s even in the middle of summer sometimes, depending on the valley you're in, what kind of weather system comes in. Whereas in the southeast, it's going to stay pretty consistent even if you're in the mountains. So this is just as broad of application as possible and really applies to most people in the U.S. Now, obviously, you're going to have to tailor these layers to yourself and to your environment, but there's no really good magic. Here's how to do it. I think a lot of people expect that with gear is, they watch a video and they're like, what's the magic bullet I'm looking for when they, bring up their syllabus or whatever it be. There's really no magic dot, magic bullet, magic word, phrase, layer, anything like that. You're going to have to tailor it to your environment and learn what works best for you out there. So from there, let's go into the next bit. So what is my experience with all these layers and how to layer and where am I coming from, and am I just pulling this out of my ass? Am I just reading off a prompter or something like that? Not quite. So I did grow up in Georgia in the southeast, hunting and out in the woods all the time, camping through Boy Scouts and just in general living in the woods. So I have quite a bit of experience down there for cold weather, which the winters out there are really different than where I live now in Colorado, which what brought me out to Colorado was the Army. So I spent 8 years in the Army in Colorado and then did a year in Korea. And so I got to experience some pretty different winters compared to what I was used to growing up, and I had to adapt to those and how to wear layers, what I'm wearing, what I'm doing while I'm moving, and how I'm really applying those layers to my body. So do have quite a bit of experience running around in the cold, everything from really humid 30s and 20s to really cold single digits, especially with the wind chill getting down to the negatives out here in Colorado with lots of snow compared to a lot of wet in Georgia. So I do have quite a bit of experience in the cold weather and moving around and how to prevent hypothermia, treating a few hypothermia cases, and then just in general just being out in the cold quite a bit because that's when a lot of stuff happens is in the cold and training doesn't stop. And while they never deployed in the wintertime, did hit those tail end of winters in Afghanistan and then the very beginning of winters by the time we were leaving on deployment. So didn't ever deploy in the wintertime, but did plenty of training and just lived out here in Colorado long enough that winters are something I'm very used to and very used to having to bundle up a lot differently than in the southeast. So that's my experience level, and that's where I'm coming from with my experience and how I'm doing things, how I'm talking about it. And when I show you how I really like to layer up for into those 30s, it's coming from being out here in Colorado, moving around quite a bit while in those cold weather environments. So that's that. So all the layers we're about to talk about to get into them, they're all USGI, like I said in the beginning, so they're all issued layers. So that brings a few things to go along with them that we really need to pay attention to. First off, they're all synthetic. You're not going to see any natural fibers in here as far as the main construction and the main material being used in these. So you might see, some cotton in there, but it's not going to be the, primary thing that they're made out of, not the primary layer or the surface that's dealing with the weather and the wind and temperatures. From there, you're not going to see any wool these days, no merino wool especially. The Army and the Marine Corps even got rid of the wool, at the end of the day. They got rid of it, replaced it with synthetic because a little cheaper and you can get a lot of good effects from synthetic clothing and wearing it around. So these are all synthetic layers and they're all issued layers. And like I said before, we have mostly Army EQUIX and then 1 or 2 Marine Corps layers and then a PCU example to show you kind of like PCUs go a little fancier. But there's a pretty good spread of USGI layers out there. The military at large in the US does a pretty good job with cold weather clothing. With the Army, the EQUIX, the extended cold weather clothing system, and the Marine Corps, I forgot what they call it. It more or less aligns to EQUIX. There's a few changes here and there. All of it makes sense at the end of the day. The Navy uses very similar system, and the Air Force is going to follow more of an EQUIX system with a little bit of incorporation of what the Marine Corps Navy uses. There are a few elements every now and then you see with them that's kind of oddballs, but they're just picking and choosing. So USGI layers, you get a lot of good stuff out of it. There are civilian equivalents, obviously, and a lot of it is based on civilian stuff from the past 5 to 10 years. So maybe it's not all extremely up to date as far as what's out within the last year or two on civilian market, but it is very comparable, and you can kind of mix and match a little bit of it with civilian counterparts and be pretty good off. Now, if you really want to get down to how to layer, your climbing, your hiking brands are going to be the ones that have the best layers that are equivalent to USGI ones, or what USGI ones are based off of at the end of the day. And then nowadays there's some really top tier, they've gotten kind of wild with it, that's for sure, but there's some really top tier hunting clothing brands that have gotten really into the game about cold weather layering and just kind of breaking it down into very niche pieces so you can layer up with a very particular piece with this very particular piece and kind of do some crazy layering. And you do see some of that, especially within like more of your SOF elements in the military right now, where they're using some of that in there. But it's all about expense too, because USGI layers typically going to be a heck of a lot cheaper than anything you're finding in the civilian market and within that hunting market for those top tier brands. Which is another thing about civilian brands is you can find a lot of really good clothing within civilian brands like North Face and Patagonia. But something you need to watch out for when you're looking at those brands is some of them are less tailored to the outdoor environment that company is associated with, and they're more intended to be used in that, hey, I'm going to leave my apartment and go get a cup of coffee, but I want a nice warm jacket in the process. So pay attention, when you're going out and you're buying civilian brand stuff, as far as what's the intended use, how it's made, what are the features, because they may look at first glance like this is good for outdoor use, but it may not really be intended for outdoor use. So that was a little long ramble, but let's go from there. Okay, now it's finally time to get into the layers, looking at the layers we're going to talk about and how we're going to wear them. So let's start with base layers. Put one on, check it out, and look at what a base layer does for you and some critical things about a base layer that you want to make sure to consider. So our base layer, and this is the first thing we're going to put on, and they come in top and bottom sets, and you can wear them independently, you can wear them together, and we'll go into a little bit of that. But this is the first thing you put on, and it's going to be the base of everything else you're going to put on. You're going to be wearing this pretty much throughout all the temperature ranges from the 50s down to the 20s, and it's going to kind of pile on top of it as far as upgrading and downgrading. This is always going to stay on. These layers, it's not much of a thermal layer, it's more of it's just a body temperature regulation layer that is moisture wicking, breathable, and quick drying, and it's next to your skin. So these ones, for your base layers, you want them to be fairly tight to you. You don't want a whole lot of looseness to it, and you don't want them to be really baggy on you, because you want them to sit next to your skin, so if you do start to sweat, it's going to draw that moisture and help wick it away and dry it off pretty quickly. So when you're getting your base layers, especially your level 1s, which in EQUIX, it's called level 1s, Marine Corps, very similar, call it level 1s as well. You want these to fit you pretty well and have that athletic, tight fit. And it's kind of similar to rash guards as far as how they're going to look on you and fit on you and feel on you. You can wear them, pretty much the same way as that. And just going to start off everything with this. So from here, we're going to kind of pile on these, and it's going to help regulate your body temperature, contain some of it, but especially get the moisture off you and dry it off pretty quick. So you definitely want to have one of these laying around and be putting it on first thing when you're starting off in cold weather. And like I said, this comes in a top and bottom set, so you can put the top on, put the bottoms on, leave the bottoms off, however you want to do once you figure out kind of what works best for you in the temperature range. But these In those 50s, especially if there's a wind, that's a kind of chilly wind, this is all you really need underneath your coat, underneath your field uniform. You don't really need much else. So let's go into what you're going to put on top of this and how it's going to help out as well. So what we're going to put on top of our base layers is a level 2. So commonly called a waffle. It's a grid fleece top. Now, it's called grid fleece, called a waffle just because it has a waffle texture to it. That fleece has been gridded out. So there's channels in between the fleece that allow for more breathability. So when you're pairing this on top of your base layer, which is already breathable, already moisture wicking, and already quick drying, you're adding a layer that's going to help trap some of that heat from your body as it's coming off you, and it's going to help you, regulate that body temperature. Breathability is going to be there while still maintaining that moisture wicking and quick drying aspect. So you're going to put these on top of your base layers. Once you get down into the 40s and you're moving around, especially when it's windy outside, these are going to be really good to go for you. You will start to feel yourself if you're hoofing it, moving around a lot. In the 40s, this you may get a little warm, so you want to be paying attention to, high 40s, and you're really moving around a lot. This may start to be a little bit too much, but once you hit those low 40s and you're really hitting those like 30s when the wind chill gets in there, you're definitely going to want this on. Now this, you can get a top and bottom set just like your base layers, and that's up to you depending on how cold it is, what you're doing, if you want to wear both top and bottom. Now for me, I like to wear the base layer top, level 2 top, and then the base layer bottoms underneath my field uniform, and that really did it for me down to the low 40s. I could be pretty comfortable as long as I'm moving around, and I was not really complaining too hard. Once I hit the 30s, start feeling it. Once I moved around a bit, definitely warmed up and was good to go. Now, obviously, cold is subjective to everybody. Everybody feels it differently, and depending on the environment you're in, that cold's going to hit you a lot differently. So it's something you're going to have to play with at the end of the day, whether or not that works for you. But for me, in a dry environment where there wasn't a whole lot of wind, or I could find a good windbreak to get behind from time to time, this was pretty much all I needed. So base layers, level 2s are critical, and it's going to really what's going to trap a lot of heat from your body while you're moving around and keep you from sweating a lot. If you're going to sweat some, it's just going to happen, but it's going to prevent you from sweating quite a bit, especially if it's getting those low 40s and you're staying a little on the chillier side, but you're maintaining that comfortable body temperature and you're not getting too cold. So let's go into what we're going to wear this under and how it's going to affect the rest of our layers. Before we get into what we're going to wear this under, we'll go over a Marine Corps variation on the mid-weights level 2s, and that's going to be the Fleece Pullover they have, made out of Polartec material, which is also going to segue into another point, which is what is a lot of this made out of is Polartec material. But before we get into that really too far, this is a Polartec fleece. This is really nice. It's got a kangaroo pocket on it, quarter zip or more like halfway zip, and this can replace your grid fleece tops. You can wear this. It is a little warmer than your grid fleeces are, but you play with that how you need to, and they can wear on top of your base layers and underneath your field uniform just fine. So that's kind of a variation the Marine Corps has. They do have their grid fleeces, and they do have those pullover fleece tops. So let's talk a little bit about Polartec material and why it's so cool. It's just a high-end fabric for thermal layers, fleeces, everything in between. So Polartec is used in equivalents through various government contractors. It's pretty much the baseline material they're going to use for your base layers in your level 2s, and it's going to be incorporated into some other layers as well, especially when there's a thermal aspect to it and not just strictly a shell kind of layer. So Polartec's really nice. It's lightweight. It's awesome. There's a lot of kind of equivalents out there at the end of the day, and within the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps, once you start saying fleece, it's going to be Polartec or an equivalent material made to the same specifications, and it's doing the same thing as Polartec. So that's Polartec. Definitely something to look out for, and definitely something you want to see when you get a piece of clothing that's for cold weather. Is it Polartec or not? Because is it like Polartec? Is it equivalent to Polartec? Because if it is, it's going to be a good layer for you. It's going to keep you dry, warm. It's going to be quick drying. It's going to be moisture wicking, everything in between. So that's Polartec real quick though. So what are we wearing? Our first 2 layers underneath. Well, that's going to be our field uniform. So whether in the Army, Marine Corps, or you have a nice, Cryo Precision or Patagonia field top, whatever it may be, you're going to be wearing those first 2 layers underneath this for most of the time, unless you can, hit certain weather conditions that dictate other layers or other, outer shells, whatever it may be. Most of the time, it's just underneath your field uniform as it is. Now, 50-50 NICO does a good job blocking some wind while still letting most of it through. which is good for breathability because you don't want to block all the wind out and you don't want to keep everything you have trapped in because you want to maintain that breathability aspect, because when you do that, you're helping your body dump some of that heat, and that wind's going to come in and help kind of dry you off. So like I said before, we're not trying to stay cozy warm, really warm, and cuddle around the campfire kind of stuff. We're trying to stay comfortable, maybe even a little bit on the cold side, but that's going to help us at the end of the day because we're not going to sweat. So the field uniform in those dry wintertime conditions is a great thing to wear. So in the Marine Corps, this replaces the wind jacket. In the Army, there is a wind jacket. Now, the Army also has another level that would go on top of our two base layers, our level 1s and level 2s, which is level 3, which is a fleece jacket that can be worn underneath your field uniform and also act as a better, very warm mid layer underneath some layers we're going to talk about as well. But that layer kind of has ups and downs. That fleece is good, but it's not the greatest thing out there, so we're skipping that one and going more into what we're actually going to wear for movement, because this is stuff that actually works well for you and is not bulky and all that. So that's what we're going to wear this under, and this is going to also play into fitment. So we're going to cover fitment real quick, and then we'll go into our wind jackets. So for fitment, we kind of already covered that a little bit within those first two layers. So your base layers and your level 2s, you want them to be fairly tight to your body, not restricting movement obviously, but you want to have them tight, athletic fit. That is because you want them close to your body to help draw moisture away, increase breathability, and to keep you dry. Now, everything that piles on top of this, it's the same size. So if you're wearing a medium base layer, you're going to wear a medium waffle. If you're wearing a medium waffle, you're going to wear a medium wind shirt. If you're wearing a medium wind shirt, you're going to wear a medium soft shell. If you're wearing a medium soft shell, you're going to wear a medium hard shell. So fitment-wise, everything's already sized out to fit on top of the layer that goes underneath it. So you don't have to go, oh no, all of a sudden I'm wearing a base layer in my field uniform, I need to go up a size in a coat. Not really. It's made to be worn over those. So fitment-wise, it's all built in. You don't have to worry about going up a size or really worrying about, well, this says this measurement, because it's just built to be worn over those layers. So that's fitment. It's really easy. Just order your standard size, get your standard size. Now, when you get to your outer layers and your hard shells, soft shells, the only time you really want to go up a size is you're really going to bulk underneath them for extended cold weather temperatures. So if you're going to bring out a high down puffy jacket or even a low loft kind of jacket, but you're going to wear that under a soft shell or hard shell, you might have to upgrade in size and go from a medium to a large just to fit over that jacket and maintain some kind of movability, because once you get to there, you're going to start seeing where you're filling out that coat real hard because you're wearing a lot of layers underneath it, and now you're going to definitely upgrade layers. So otherwise, your layers are going to fit over every other layer. You're not have to worry about going up a size. So kind of long-winded, but some people just, it's complicated when you look at it and going, oh, I'm wearing this over so many layers, I obviously have to go up a size. You don't really have to unless you're wearing a lot of thick, heavy layers underneath that jacket itself. So let's go from there into wind jackets. All right, a wind jacket layer. Now, the Army has this as level 4. The Marine Corps uses your standard field top as your wind jacket, which is just fine because the wind jacket isn't blocking 100% of the wind. It's still pretty breathable. It's still letting a good bit of that wind through, which is going to help you, like we talked about already, drying off, keeping a cool body temperature, and not getting too overly warm, but keeping the worst off of you. So the wind jackets can keep the worst of it off of you. They're going to be wind resistant and a little bit water resistant, not a whole lot. Again, we're looking at best use in those dry kind of environments, and it only is going to come in a top within the Army system. You're not going to see a bottoms wind jacket or equivalent. Your pants just going to do the job with the layers you're wearing underneath there. And your knee pads are going to help keep that wet off of you when you take a knee, or if you have to get in the prone, hopefully it's not too wet. So wind jackets are cool. You can wear them on top of your base layers, level 2s. You can put your field jacket underneath these and then put your base layer on top, or put your wind jacket on top of all that and kind of really just start packing in the heat and retaining a lot of the heat. Wearing this over a base layer with your kit on is definitely a good option, because you're going to be retaining heat with this, because it's wind resistant, but it's still going to let some through and some of your heat out, but it's going to keep the worst of it off you. So if you have this, a base layer, your plate carrier, your backpack, your chest rig, this is pretty good to go for a lot of those temperatures when you're getting into those 40s and you're moving around quite a bit. Definitely, it's not, not a thermal layer by any means. It's not lined. It's just a shell kind of layer. It's going to be a nylon polyester type deal. I think these are 100% nylon, and a little bit of stretch to them just to incorporate some of that movement you're going to be doing while you're wearing them. So wind jackets are pretty cool. And like every layer we're talking about, you could make a whole 30+ minute video on each layer about pros, cons, where to wear it, how to wear it, different styles, everything in between. This is more, in that nutshell kind of video. When you're going to put it on, how you're going to wear it, what you're going to wear underneath it, and what you're going to put on top of it. So wind jacket's cool. Definitely recommend you have one in your closet because they offer some good perks as far as being wind resistant. Now, if you're not in a really windy area, you may not need one so much, but it does help trap some of that heat in you while maintaining a breathability aspect that helps you stay away from overheating and sweating too bad. So wind jacket's cool. Definitely recommend getting one. The Army ones are nice. It's kind of almost just a field top with a little bit of changes to it that just make it nice to wear in general. So let's go from here into a layer that's going to increase our wind resistance and finally add some water resistance because we haven't hit anything that's really water resistant yet. And that's going to be important, especially once you hit that wet snow, those wet conditions, especially right if it rains or right if it snows. So your soft shells. Now this in the Army is level 5. Marine Corps, can't remember if they have a soft shell layer. They have their combat jacket, but I can't remember if they have a specific soft shell layer as well. But this top and bottom set in the Army, and this is what's going to incorporate your wind resistance and finally some water resistance. So now you can move around a little bit more in those wet earth conditions. Now they're not waterproof by any means. They're going to let some through at the end of the day, but you can move around those snowstorms, maybe not snowstorms, but when it's snowing and there's a light rain outside, this is going to help protect you in those cold conditions. Now, wearing this, probably going to be most of the time when you can put this on, you're wearing your base layers, your waffles, and your field top, and then you're going to put this on, and you can put this on over your field bottoms as well, and help retain a lot more heat. Temperature-wise, when you hit in your 30s and you're not moving around a whole ton, this is a good layer to have because it's going to help keep a lot of that heat in, but still be breathable, and you can still dump heat pretty easy with these because a lot of them have armpit zippers, so you can open those up, and especially if it's windy or you move around, kind of flap your arms around, you're going to help get some cold air in there, help kind of regulate your body temperature, cool you down a little bit without cooling you down too much, and zip it right back up, and be good to go, keep you from sweating, everything in between. Now, like I said, the 30s are kind of where you're going to start wearing these, seeing these kind of pop out of your backpack. Soft shells are good layers. It's a good jacket to have. In the 40s, depending on what you're wearing underneath it and what you're doing, these are something good to bring out as well because it definitely does add a whole layer of protection to what you're wearing underneath it and help trap some of that body heat. Now, like I've said before, cold is subjective, so you might bring this out earlier in the 40s, you might bring this out earlier in the 30s, or you might bring this out, not bring this out until you get into those low 30s. It all depends on what you're doing. You just got to pay attention to how your body reacts to the cold and how long it takes you to get cold. So soft shells are a good layer. PCUs, which are the SOF kind of version of all of this, they incorporate some fancier features, and everything we've looked at already, there's a PCU equivalent. Everything we'll look at after here, there's a PCU equivalent. They get a little fancier, and you'll see some additions. You'll see some of the layers broken down into separate layers. You'll see 1As, 1Bs. I don't think there's just a 2A, 2B, but there might be 3A, 3Bs, and then from there you get kind of just a solid different style within level 4s, level 5s, level 6s. So PCUs add some fanciness to it all, and definitely a little cooler. Their PCU level 5 bottoms are pretty similar to the Army level 5 bottoms, but they are a little nicer. But most of the time, especially the older ones, they come in solid colors. You're going to see this alpha gray, I think it's called, and then maybe coyote. And then nowadays you start seeing a lot more of them in camouflage patterns, so your multicams, and then your AOR1, AOR2, and then not much in MARPAT because they don't really apply to the SOF elements, but yeah. So soft shells are a good layer. Definitely recommend having one in your backpack because it's a good way to add on that protection and help contain some heat in your body when you're moving around. So our last layer is our hard shell layer. Now within the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army, that's just your what were the top and what were the bottoms. This is going to come as a set, and you can wear them independently, however you need to. And you're wearing these in your actively wet environments, so it's actually snowing, it's raining, and more than just a light snow or a light rain, or you're taking a knee and getting prone in those kind of environments where it's been raining and snowing a lot, or when it's really cold. Now, this is also the most dangerous layer you can put on because of what it does. It's waterproof and it's pretty much windproof as well. And while there is some breathability to the material, because it is Gore-Tex or Gore-Tex equivalent, it's nowhere near as breathable as anything else we put on before this. So you're going to start trapping a lot of body heat. Once you start moving around in this, you're going to see yourself get warmer and start sweating really quickly. So that's what makes this so dangerous to put on. It's because if you put it on too early, you're just going to find yourself overheating very quickly. Now, if you get those low 30s and those 20s and getting into the teens, especially wind chill, this is something you definitely want to break out if you're not moving around a whole lot. If you're still maintaining a good amount of movement, you might not need this until it starts to rain or snow, whatever it may be. Before then, you don't really need this one unless you're sitting still and not moving around a whole lot. You need to trap a lot of body heat. This is the first and pretty much the only layer you might want to upsize, go up a size or two from the get-go because of how you want to wear it. Now, if you put this on, then put your chest rig, your plate carrier, your backpack on. Like I said, these are waterproof and windproof, and while they're breathable, they're not very breathable. So you're creating huge heat sinks with the plate carrier, from here to here on your front and back, with your backpack on, with your chest rig on. You're creating pretty big spots where you're just trapping a lot of body heat in what it is a really non-breathable kind of coat. So you may want to upsize in these to wear over those pieces of equipment. So if you have a plate carrier or a chest rig, having this size to be able to fit over those while you're wearing them is a good idea because you're going to still trap some of that body heat, but you're not creating just a huge heat sink by wearing them underneath, wearing this underneath those kind of pieces of equipment and pieces of gear. So that's something to consider about these is just wearing it over those instead of underneath them because you want to avoid that massive area where you're going to start sweating pretty quickly because you're wearing on top of or below, something that's trapping heat as it is. This is a good layer to have though, because especially if you get in those 20s and the wind chill's hitting those teens and everything in between, you're going to start, really building up that body heat if you're not moving around a ton. You're going to help contain it, help you stay warm and a comfortable warm without, overheating everything in between. And once it gets wet, you might want to start having to consider what you're wearing underneath it and how you're wearing it. Now, obviously, if it's a wet environment, actively snowing, actively raining, taking off clothes and layers is, dangerous because you're going to get wet in between. So you need to consider what you're wearing before then. Obviously, put this on, take it off as soon as you can. Hopefully, you can plan out a spot to downgrade some layers underneath it. Do that, or just, fight light, freeze at night, which sucks, but you might have to do it at the end of the day in order to get where you're going without, kind of dying from hypothermia or getting too cold and sweating too hard. So this is a good layer to have, but remember there are some downsides to it. All right, so let's talk about a few accessories you're going to wear with all the layers we already went over. So first off, headgear wise. Now, if you're in a tactical environment, moving around, do patrols, everything like that, you're wearing a helmet. That's going to help retain some body heat. Obviously, pads allow for a lot of breathability, and it's nothing, super warm to be wearing, especially when it's colder. So something you can wear underneath it potentially, or wear in place of it if you're in an environment where you can take your helmet off, and that's safe to do so, is just a micro fleece cap. Now, if you're in the Army, in the Marine Corps, you've been issued one of these, you bought a few extra because you lost a few, found them, everything in between, you'll have one of these laying around already. You know how great they are. So your Polartec micro fleece caps or your equivalents within the U.S. military issued system, everything like that. This is a great, lightweight, really warm, quick drying, moisture wicking, and a tad bit breathable fleece cap that you can just wear from the 40s and down, depending on what you're doing. These are just great fleece caps at the end of the day. And if you start to overheat, take it off, dump some heat, prevent yourself from sweating, and you can put it back on and warm up, stay warm, everything like that. Now, obviously, dumping a lot of heat like that can be dangerous, so you really need to kind of watch what you're doing, because if it's 30 or in the 20s and you're wearing this and you're taking it off to dump a lot of heat, you want to put it back on pretty quickly. You don't want to take it off and then sit there for 10 minutes when the wind chill's pushing into the teens and the single digits, and you're just like, oh, I'm all good, and then you start to get cold because you've just exposed a large surface area of where body heat dumps out of naturally in the first place. So this is a good way to pack on some heat and to dump some heat, but you do want to be careful taking off the dump heat because it can just get pretty dangerous. So that's really the first accessory you're going to want and to have around, especially if you're just walking around. And if you're in a even in a tactical environment where you can be without a helmet, this is something to have out there, or wear it underneath your helmet because these are pretty thin and they can fit underneath a lot of your helmets. Might have to play around the pads a little bit, just chin strap, but you can wear it underneath it. So from there, a few other accessories, let's talk about those. Now your next accessory you might want to have in your backpack, have in your pocket, wherever it may be, is just a neck gaiter. Now your issued neck gaiters, everything like that, are pretty much made for hot weather environments, and they're all going to be FR. So that is a little bit of a downside. They're made for hot weather, but they still do block some of that wind off of you. So if you wear this, put this on, it's going to protect your neck, back of your head, your ears, all that. You can wear it underneath the helmet, and it's going to tuck into some of your layers underneath. So this neck gaiter, or just a whole-on balaclava, is a good thing to have on you to help keep some of that wind off you. Help keep your face a little warmer, because if you're in the Army and the Marine Corps still, or just in general, you don't have a beard. Beard does help quite a bit with the cold weather. If you don't have that, neck gaiter is definitely a good way to go. Even if you do, though, this is a good way to keep your neck, your ears, everything between a little bit warmer. So having a balaclava or a neck gaiter is a really good idea. Now from there, gloves. So for the most part, when you get down to 30s, your standard actual combat gloves are going to do you just fine. Now, if you're getting like those thinner pig style gloves where they're real thin, real tactile, everything's built around just being really like, almost not having a glove on, but having a glove on, those aren't going to keep you very warm. You're going to want something a little heavier duty. Well, that's where your combat gloves come in handy, because they are going to keep you a little bit warm while you're moving around and not still. Because the last thing you want is your thumbs to get cold, because if you've ever had your thumbs freeze up, it's pretty terrible. So we want to prevent that. Now the Army has started switching to outdoor research for their issued gloves. So that's great, because these are great gloves, and it's something to definitely consider getting a hold of. Is some actual core leather gloves, because they're going to have a little bit of lining in them. They're going to be more water resistant, more wind resistant, and definitely keep you a little more insulated. So having something like a good set of gloves that is meant for cold weather is a good idea, but you have to understand that they're going to be a little bulkier as a result. Your combat gloves are already a little bulky, but they still, pretty dexterous, pretty easy to operate with things. Cold weather gloves definitely add some layers to that, so it's a little harder too. But all things you need to consider, keeping your hands warm is pretty important, because if you're in the military or whatever you're doing, if your hands get cold, you're pretty much going to have to stop what the heck you're doing. To go into those, liners for your gloves, especially if you're touching a lot of metal, a lot of rocks, and like that. Once those get cold, they stay cold, and they take a long time to warm up. So even if you do have cold weather gloves on, or if you have space in your combat gloves, some liners are a good thing to have. Again, the Army's moving towards outdoor research, getting away from those old wool liners, which is pretty much the only wool thing really left in the cold weather system, was those wool mitten liners and everything like that, or just wool glove liners. But yeah, so having a set of liners on you to put underneath your gloves, if they're sized appropriately, is a very good idea, because it adds some insulation, adds some warmth, keep your hands from freezing up. Liners themselves aren't really a good glove, because they're not built to, built for hard use. But you're gonna, having a pair on you, especially if you're going to be operating in those 30s and 20s, that's all it's really going to get to, is a very good idea. So, yeah, from there, over mitts, all just depends on the weather conditions. Your cold weather gloves, especially the more modern ones within the U.S. Army system, are going to be a bit more wind and water resistant. But if you're getting to those points where it's going to be snowing a lot, I'm going to need, some more layers. Some over mitts are a good idea to have, especially because the new ones, again, are outdoor research, which is pretty freaking awesome. This is one of the variations that's out there. But over mitt you can put on, trigger finger one, so you can put this on, have some actual water resistance, and be touching a lot of those colder environment, or colder things, colder metal, rocks that are wet, everything like that in between, and have some good protection on your hand, because we don't want our hands to freeze up. So gloves are kind of hard though, because once you start putting these on in the cold weather, they get bulky, it gets hard to operate anything, it gets hard to touch radios, to write stuff down, even operate your rifle in the day. It gets pretty hard. So something to consider, something you have to get used to, because, it's just one of those things. So those are some accessories you definitely want to consider having on you. And gloves are kind of the hardest thing, because you're giving up some just to get a little more warmth and keep your hands good to go. So yeah, those are general accessories. So let's touch on boots really quick. So boots, again, like everything else we've talked about, you could make your own 30-minute, hour-long length video covering just the intricacies and particular parts of this and that and the ups and downs, the pros and cons. Every single piece, boots the same way. So in general, a waterproof or at least very water resistant boot, which you're going to go with, and not a low cut. You're going to go mid cut or high cut kind of boot. So, not your tennis shoes. You're not going to run around those. Not your super high speed Ultimas or whatever it may be. You're not going to want those for your wintertime conditions because once you start hitting snow, if it's more than an inch deep, you're going to start getting snow in those kind of low cut boots and low cut shoes. So something that's a mid cut with a good wool sock, good wool blend, straight synthetic kind of blend sock, whatever it may be, is what you're going to wear underneath those. So again, boots are a whole conversation themselves, just like everything else. But in general, a good water-resistant, waterproof boot that's at least a mid-cut, goes over your ankle, and then a good wool sock or wool blend, something like that, to go underneath there is going to help you while you're moving around. Once you start sitting still, staying still, if your foot does get wet, you can start to feel it. But having an insulated boot is a whole other thing. You can get insulated boots, cold weather boots like that. But in general, don't wear hot weather boots with your hot weather socks when it's getting cold out there because you're going to start getting frost nip, frostbite. You're going to get wet. You're going to sweat. It's just not going to be a good day. You can wear boot gaiters with them. That's going to help, especially if there's snow, walk around in snow, deep snow especially, or if it's even just raining a lot and you're walking through tall grass or just undergrowth and vegetation in the forest. Boot gaiters are going to help you keep that water and from getting soaked into your pant leg, getting into your boots, getting on your socks, and making your life terrible. So boot gaiters are something to consider. Nothing, I think it's kind of a preference on whether or not you're going to wear boot gaiters. You can get away with not wearing them, but it is something good to consider having on you and putting in your pack for the end of the day. So that's the last little bit of kind of your layering system. So go over real quick. I know we touched on it a little bit already, but I'm going to go over my preferred layers for temperatures down to about the low 30s while I'm moving around, and it can even kind of serve me pretty well into those upper 20s. Again, while moving around, and I'm not sitting still a whole lot, staying in there a whole lot. This can definitely be worn in those 20s and those windy conditions. Definitely done it before. It kind of sucks, but it does keep you warm enough to not, get too overly cold or suffer from it too hard. And that's a pretty simple layering system where it's just your base layer top and your base layer bottoms, the level 2 grids, and then sometimes I'd have the bottoms on, most of the time not. My legs tend to stay pretty warm, especially because that's what's keeping me moving is my legs. I'm walking around in quite a bit. And then my field uniform on top of all that. So this with a plate carrier on, a backpack on, you're going to stay pretty good in those 30s when you're moving around a whole lot. And as long as you're not sitting still too terribly long, it's going to keep you pretty warm. I've sat and stood in OPs doing, for training with just this on into the 20s, and I'm not going to say it was terribly comfortable, but it does the job, keep me warm, move around a little bit, keep my body temperature kind of up just from moving around, and I'm staying pretty good to go. Now, this isn't everybody's kind of layering. This is what worked for me. It might not work for you. Cold is subjective. It affects everybody differently. So, think about that, how it's going to work for you. But this is what worked for me really well when I'm moving around and not still a whole lot. This is all I really ever needed. So that's the layering for movement in a nutshell. Again, everything was pretty condensed. It's just a general overview of what you're going to put on, how you're going to wear it, and what to watch out for. Everything here, you can talk about pros and cons for an hour, 30 minutes, whatever it may be, pretty in depth, and really get into the kind of really dig deep into each individual layer. But this is just an overview of how you're going to do it. So a lot of this, you just have to get out there and play with it. You have to do it. You have to get out there in the cold weather, hopefully not in a, really emergency kind of situation or anything like that. Just get out there, wear it out in the woods, get out with your buddies, go hunt, go out in the national forest, where it may be, wear your layers, see how it treats you if you're hiking, everything like that. If you don't know, you don't know. So get out there and try it all out. See how it works for you. See what works best for you. See what layers don't do anything for you. See what layers you really need on you. You may find a system that works really well for you in your state, in your environment within your state. If it changes quite a bit. Here in Colorado, the plains are a lot different than the mountains, and the mountains can be pretty dangerous, but the plains can be pretty dangerous as well. In the plains, we got a lot of wind. It's pretty much constant. Once the wind stops, you notice pretty quickly because the wind's always there. While on the mountains, the temperature and the ranges of temperatures are pretty crazy. It's going to snow a lot heavier, everything like that. So where you're at is going to affect what you're going to wear quite a bit. You may be able to get away with a lot less. You may have to wear a lot more. And just know that if you're moving from environment to environment, from state to state, part of the country to part of the country, what you wear there may not work quite as well for the next place. So just remember all that. Get out there, play with it, talk to your buddies, what they've been wearing, what they're wearing. A lot of this has a civilian counterpart you can find out there and get different kind of things to combine it up with. The military keeps it pretty simple. All the layers are pretty simple. There's nothing really fancy about each individual layer. It's just kind of, that's the layer. And the outer layers offer more features than the base layers do. But overall, it's pretty simple. Just got to get out there, got to do it. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, leave a comment below with what works best for you. I'm sure I left something out as per usual, but put a comment down below, whatever it is, so we can talk about that. Make sure people are tracking what's going on, and then make sure you head on over to our website, check out all these layers. Pretty much all of them. Some of them stay in stock pretty heavily. Some of them rotate in and out. And if it's not there and you're looking for it, make sure you sign up for emails, because it's the first place you're going to find out about some of the stuff when it comes in. If it gets featured in email, you'll be one of the first to know that it's in and be able to grab it. Because a lot of these layers, like your level 4s, level 5s, level 6s even, we get them in fairly regularly, but they go just as quick as they come in. So again, thanks for watching. Make sure you leave a comment below what your thoughts are, and let's keep the conversation going.